Unatazama Sound County Talk Live. Sound County Talk Live News.
Good morning, welcome back. This is the continuing coverage of Budget 2025 and 26. This broadcast will be ending at 10 a.m. and thereon the Swahili team will be coming to you live from Parliament with Rashid Abdallah. We are also activating our bureaus to get the submissions by Kenyans on what their views are on the estimates that will be presented in Parliament by John Mbadi, who will be taken to the lectern for his maiden budget presentation and the vow that he had taken not to raise taxes. These are the live pictures coming to you from the road where the Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi boarded the Toyota Land Cruiser heading to the National Treasury. In his company is our business reporter Jimmy Mbogo, and his camera person Felix Orare will be bringing you the live pictures also from National Treasury, where John Mbadi, the Principal Secretary at the Ministry of National Treasury, Dr. Chris Kiptoo, will be having somewhat a busy day before heading to Parliament alongside other team members from the National Treasury for the Budget 2025-26 presentation that will be made at the National Assembly today by the Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi. We, however, nonetheless have a panel of experts here in studio. On my far right is on my immediate right is the CEO of the Institute of Public Accountants Kenya, ISPAC, CPA Dr. Grace Kamau. Good morning.
Good morning.
Much appreciated.
Thank you
for your company and presence here. We also have Alex Kanyi, who is a tax expert with CDH Kenya. Good morning, Alex.
Morning.
Much appreciated for your time, as well as the presence of Lydia Mose, Senior Manager at KPMG. Good morning.
Good morning.
Much appreciated. Shortly, we'll have the company of Churchill Saoke, a PhD research and governance expert, who will be giving us his account here on the broadcast as we discuss this very pertinent matter. Let's begin, gentlemen and ladies, with some of the allocations per sector here, and starting off with the National Executive estimates for 2025 and 26, which is 2.43 trillion Kenya shillings that will be at the disposal. This is what will be available for the National Executive. 2.54 trillion Kenya shillings for utilization at the disposal of the National Executive. And moving on to also the biggest sector allocation done in this year's in the next year's financial budget, which is education, that will take 701.9 billion Kenya shillings. This is the biggest allocation. We'll be having a breakdown of what goes to the Teacher Service Commission and to the levels of education. Coming to also the Critical Illness Fund that is allocated 10 billion Kenya shillings. This pertinent, of course, given that the country has now transitioned to the new healthcare model meant to provide universal healthcare coverage for Kenyans. Also, the other sectors now, the key allocations, education, 701.9 billion Kenya shillings. That is a translation to 28% of the total budget for the 2025-26. Energy, infrastructure and ICT will take up 500.7 billion Kenya shillings, which is 20% of the budget here. Infrastructure is what we'll be also focusing on, given the pending bills that is not a priority. It appears so in the budget. Public administration and international relations, 321 billion Kenya shillings, accounting for 13% of the total budget, while national security will take up 251 billion Kenya shillings. That is 10% of the total budget for next year's financial Yeah. Also, taking a look at health, what was allocated, this being one of the key pillars in President William Ruto's Better plan, which he had presented the Kenyan people, that will take 137 billion Kenya shillings, accounting for 5% of the budget. Agriculture, rural and urban development, 78 billion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 3%. Economic and commercial affairs, 58 billion Kenya shillings, that is 2% of the budget. In terms of the specifications on the education estimates for the next financial year, the Teachers Service Commission will take up the lion's share of the 701.9 billion, and it will take up 387.7 billion. Free primary education will then take up 22.2 billion Kenya shillings. Free day secondary education, 89.5 billion Kenya shillings, while university will take up 81.9 billion Kenya shillings. Also, in terms of the Teacher Service Commission estimates of how then it will utilize the funding, as per the presentation it made of the utilization of the funding, primary teachers 202.8 billion Kenya shillings, secondary teachers 172.6 billion Kenya shillings, and tertiary teachers will take up 2 billion Kenya shillings. Teachers capacity development, this includes retooling because of the competency-based curriculum, 1.6 billion Kenya shillings, as well as the teachers' administrative expenditure, which will take up 8.6 billion Kenya shillings, totaling up to the 387. Coming to the security sector, the Ministry of Defence will take up a total 100 billion Kenya shillings, and 195 of that money will be recurrent, meaning salaries and other emoluments, while 4.9 billion Kenya shillings will go to development. The National Police Service, 125 billion Kenya shillings, 123.7 of that will go to recurrent, while 1.5 billion is meant for development. The National Intelligence Service, its Director General, appeared before the National Assembly's Departmental Committee on Defence, Intelligence and Foreign Relations, where he decried underfunding of the security sector, including the agency that he heads, will take up 51.4 billion Kenya shillings, recurrent all, and the specificity around what will go into development. The presidency, that is headed by the head of state, will take up 8.5 billion Kenya shillings as the total, while 7.6 of that money will be recurrent, meaning salaries and other payments, while development will take up 894 million Kenya shillings. The Office of the Office of the President, specifically, that was the State House. The Office of the President, 5.3 billion Kenya shillings. 3.8 of that will go to recurrent, while 1.5 is meant for development. The Office of the Deputy President will take up 2.9 billion, of which 2.8 will be recurrent, and only paltry 100 million Kenya shillings for development. The estimates for universal healthcare coverage, primary healthcare, which is very key, will take up 4.1 billion Kenya shillings. Of that, of what was required in the 2024-2025 financial year. This year, that increases by more than 9 billion to 13 billion Kenya shillings. Still, the stakeholders are decrying this as a drop in the ocean. Emergency and critical care, 2 billion in the last financial year. It is an additional of 8 billion that will be coming up to 10 billion Kenya shillings. Other institutions, housing and urban development, 119.6 billion of all will go to development. Roads, 195 billion. Development, 123. Primary healthcare fund, 13 billion. Emergencies, I've mentioned 10 billion. While the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, KEMSA, will take up 5 billion Kenya shillings. We again bring you the live pictures from the National Treasury, where the CS John Mbadi, the company of our business reporter Jimmy Mbogo, will be giving us an update from the National Treasury, where all the attention will be of the nation before he makes the short distance to the National Assembly for the presentation of the budget estimate and the step that will be delivered. And once Jimmy and Felix will set up with the CS at the 14th floor of the National Treasury, then we'll be getting the account of the man of the moment, the National Treasury CS, John Mbadi, who will be making his statement later in the afternoon at the National Assembly. And this coverage will continue until when he is done with that, and the aftermath of which will be seeking the account of the lawmakers who will be present at the National Assembly. Just first, address the priority areas for the common man.
I think there's a fair attempt to deal with primary needs that we have. So things like education, healthcare, which is also a good thing. Agriculture is also quite a good thing. So we see the attempt to basically deal with what a common person would want to benefit from. But of course, as we continue with the discussion, then the question is, number one, implementation, and number two, whether the plans actually get to the common person. So, for example, if we say we're going to build schools as an example budget, we should be able to be told how many did we managed to build with the budget that was there, so that then we can say that the nice allocation to education actually translated to results that people can see. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Grace, given that of the specific sector allocations that we had just broken down for our viewers, is the money going to where it's needed most? To have an impact on the lives of Kenyans here, education, the cost of living, security, and infrastructure?
Thank you, Ayub. And before I answer your question, allow me to applaud Kenyans for the great involvement they have had on this budget. I think in the last 1 or 2 years, we have seen a lot of involvement and interest by even the general public in terms of the governance of the country, and especially on how the various budgets have been allocated. And it is something to be really applauded that Kenyans are actually involved and interested in the governance of the country. Mm-hmm. But coming to your question on the budget allocation and where it matters and whether they are going to the priority areas, allow me to say this, that even as we speak about the allocation that has been given, for example, the lion's share that has gone to the education, to the roads, to the infrastructure, to housing and to health sector, that money is still not enough. And I'm saying that when you look at even the strikes that we've had in the past in receiving the lion's share, the money that has been allocated is going to address the general public. I would say to some extent, yes, because we have seen the prioritization and all that. And for example, if I could go to the education sector, one of the concerns that has been raised up across the country is the implementation of the CBC, and we see quite some money being allocated towards that implementation. Looking at now, we are at a point where transitioning completely to the CBC. So to some extent, I would say yes, but it's still not enough, and maybe we'll be speaking more about that as we proceed with the discussion.
Yeah, the question of the limited resources, a growing budget deficit, one financial year after the other, and also utilization in the question of then how the money is utilized and the cost of corruption generally on our management of the economy. And Lydia, coming to you, it seems then that we, as per the presentation done by the CEO, the Institute of Public Accountants Association, ideally then a lot needs to be fixed, including how we approach the question of taxation and also the utilization of the funding to tighten the loose ends here and there for effective management of the economy so that more money can go to critical sectors like education?
Great. And I think it's important to query the numbers with the budget. It's important to look beyond what has been budgeted and how that goes into expenditure as well. So when you talk about the taxation, it should be more than just increasing the tax base, taxing the same bracket of people to enhance collection of taxes. So beyond that, then even as we look at the budgeted numbers and the allocation within the various sectors, also just diving into details to query really when we talk about allocation into the education sector, how then are we expending these monies in these sectors? Yeah.
And Alex, then what does that largely provides in its human resource capital? We are not endowed as other countries are in terms of natural resources. But when you look at the primary teachers allocation, 202 billion, secondary teachers 172, tertiary teachers 2 billion, teachers capacity development 1.6 billion, teachers administrative expenditure 8.6 billion. Is this a journey in the right direction?
Definitely, it is a journey in the right direction. We cannot just say how good and important our education system should be. It's the only hope that we have currently. Yeah, and of course, when you think about the Gen Z generation currently,
yes,
they're the guys who benefited, from the Kibaki government and the kind of incentives that were being introduced in the education sector, basically to make sure that you're, as a parent, you're able to take your child to a public school, perhaps get the free education from primary. When they move on to secondary, get an advantage in terms of perhaps lower fees. Then when you get to the university, you get the help component helping you. And at that point, you could even in university and help could basically help you. So we actually benefiting from that kind of investment into our education, because then out of that, then we're able to build skills that are necessary to build our economy, be it the accountants, be it the lawyers, be it the guys in manufacturing. Because then if we don't have money to say set up a manufacturing plant or put up a road, why don't we then skill this particular person in the education system to make sure that he's then able to produce something that will then help the economy. Yeah.
And Dr. Grace, I'm looking at also what then will go to what as recurrent expenditure. About 3.1 trillion of the total budget covers the day-to-day spending, also known as recurrent expenditure. And we had in April, we had the conference which happened at the Bomas of Kenya of looking at our ballooning wage bill, ideally, which is now a breach of what the Constitution enshrines under the PFM Act. Is there a proper financial management around then paying the workforce when ideally we should be cutting down and reallocating that money to sectors that are very critical in the stimulation of the economy?
Thank you so much, Ayub. And I think that is crossing my mind. As you are running through the numbers and the figures in terms of the various sectors that have been allocated and the amounts that have been allocated, allow me to say that out of the 4.239 budget that is allocated, that will be expenditure for the 2025-2026 financial year, over 73% of that budget actually goes to recurrent expenditure. Sitting here and thinking about what that means, that over 73% of even your salary, if you're earning 100 shillings, and over 73% or 73 shillings of that going to just paying the bills and paying your recurrent expenditure, basically consumption. I think that is not a very good space to be in, looking at the big proportion that goes to recurrent expenditure and looking at only about 20% of that money then goes to development. So looking at then the level of development that we envision to achieve, then it is not a very good picture, and I think we really need to scrutinize and look at those recurrent expenditures and see how do we deal with them. And I think the biggest one of them is the wage bill, which constitutes a big consumption of that, and that is across the divide of the various sectors that have been provided. So only about 634 billion have been allocated for development, but Ayub, the even more worrying trend is when you go now even into specifics in terms of the absorption of the development section of that bill. So apart from that being very, very minimal in terms of how much has been allocated, it's about 20%, because we have about 10% that goes to the counties, is that even the level of absorption, and that is both in the national government and in the various counties, then there's still low level of absorption. And I think that has been demonstrated by the Auditor General's reports that has shown that many counties and many departments and agencies, their absorption of the development component is still low. So it is something that we need to really put our efforts into, so that then we make sure that it's budgeted. First of all, it's not sufficient enough, because in developing countries, then it is recommended that we have a higher proportion of the budget allocated to development, but also fast-tracking the absorption of it and implementation of the development projects that are there.
Yeah, and Lydia, then this takes us to the question of what also the Honourable Lady Dr. Nancy Gathongo told Parliament, that over the past 4 financial years we have paid more than 6 billion Kenya shillings in commitment fee because of not utilizing money that was at the disposal of this. What does this tell us about the intent to put money in development projects, which in turn may open up the infrastructure systems and have an impact on our economic growth?
Yeah. So largely just borrowing from what Dr. Grace just talked about, when you think about our budget expenditure and expenses over the years. So it's important to just evaluate really what the priority sectors are. We've looked at the various allocations to the various sectors. So even as that is being evaluated, so the question then becomes, do we need to perhaps reallocate and also just re-audit where are we allocating the budgets for prior years, what was the performance in the prior years, and based on that then, what lessons can we borrow going forward when it comes to expending, or rather the expenditure going forward. Yeah.
All right, Alex, before I come to you, just to give this update, is the Cabinet Secretary is now at the National Treasury. Shortly he will be heading upstairs for the office meeting that will be having the engagement throughout today with the other staff at the National Treasury. Yesterday evening we had him and Jimmy alongside the Principal Secretary, Dr. Chris Kipto, and their team colleagues at the National Treasury, the last-minute preparations ahead of budget presentation at the National Assembly. The terraces there at the National Treasury entry will be the point where the CS will be holding the traditional briefcase that will contain his statement, and the short distance on the Volkswagen thereafter that will take him to Parliament for his maiden presentation before the people's representatives, and we'll be giving you that coverage, as well as our Swahili team, which will be taking over this coverage from 10 a.m. here. Rashid Abdallah and team, once they are ready, will be of course crossing over to them. Alex, coming to you. Ideally then, looking at the expenditure and how then that will be funded, takes us to then the budget summary for the 2025-6, which assumes revenue estimates of 3.3 trillion, out of which 2.57 trillion will be from taxes, while the balance of 559, there are 600 billion about, will be other collections by ministries and government agencies, also referred to as appropriations in aid. The challenge has been, year in, year out financially, the inability to meet the revenue targets. Are we making the steps, those low, towards that point of hitting our targets, and what are the quick fixes that the government can do?
I think that's a very interesting question, Ayub. If for guys who've been tracking it, this is how it looks like.
Yeah.
2020, 2021, you have an estimate of 1.59 trillion. Then you actually land at 1.56 trillion in terms of ordinary revenue. 2021, 2022, an estimate of 1.95, but the landing was at 1.92. 2022, 2023, the estimate was 2.919 trillion, landing at 2.04 trillion. 23, 24, 2.46 trillion, landing at 2.29 trillion. 24, 25, as at April, it was at 2.11 trillion vis-a-vis an estimate of 2.58 trillion, and now looking at 25, 26 of about 2.7 trillion in terms of estimates. So what does this tell us? You can clearly see a trend that year in, year out for the last 5 years, we have estimated to collect as much as we thought we could collect, but the actual performance has actually been, below target. Even though there is year-on-year growth, so whatever you collected in, say, 2021 of 1.56 trillion is not the same thing that has been collected, say, in 23-24 of 2.29 trillion. So you can see the growth, but still be below whatever we are targeting to collect every year. So do I expect that to be different this year? My answer would be no. And the reason why I'd say that my answer would be no is that, I guess, first history tells us, just going by these numbers, that perhaps we need to be more realistic around how much we're able to raise. So that's the first point. Number two, and we keep on saying it, is we have to expand the tax base. I'm sure many people, especially the employed ones, are saying we've just had enough. We started with SHA, actually housing levy. Then we went to SHA. Then we went to an increase in NSSF in terms of how much is just getting out of your payslip. Then I think 2023 Finance Act also introduced the bands for pay-as-you-earn, with now a top rate of about 35% for pay-as-you-earn, vis-a-vis long time ago when we had 30% as the top rate. And when you look through the COVID period, when we had 25% as the top rate for pay-as-you-earn. With this finance bill, of course, the story is there is no increase. But I'm glad to be with CEO ISPAC, and I happened to actually look at the submissions that they made before the departmental committee on finance and national planning, and saying there is actually a problematic clause within the bill, which, if interpreted the way I interpret it and the way ISPAC interprets it, is a further aid actually to the payslip. So we are actually straining.
What is the specific proposal that will have more squeeze on those in the formal employment?
Of course, the problematic clause within our finance bill just says that an employer must ensure that they give an employee all reliefs that are provided in law before coming at the amount that should be subjected to pay-as-you-earn. So currently, the relief for personal tax comes at the very end when you're doing your computation. And we were just doing a computation of 100,000, someone earning 100,000, and then getting relief at the end, vis-a-vis someone earning 100,000, and then they first get all reliefs, and then whatever amount is left is subjected to pay-as-you-earn. We're actually seeing an increase of about 1,600 in terms of additional tax that they will pay. But of course, when we are engaging with the departmental committee, well, the explanation was that the reason why they want to put it that way is to just ensure that employers provide the reliefs and exemptions that employees should get. But we also suggested some wording to that particular clause to ensure that the personal relief that is provided under the Income Tax Act actually comes at the very end, to make sure that we don't raid the payslip anymore. So that is just for the employed people.
Okay.
For the business people, I think there are some efforts that have been done by the Revenue Authority, which we want to laud. For example, you have the electronic tax invoice management system, trying to target those who are in the informal sector, ensure that they issue proper invoices, and actually get into the radar of the Kenya Revenue Authority, which is a good move. We have seen the data integration that KRA is actually looking at to ensure that whatever information is being processed by businesses, KRA has that information real time and basically can be able to compare at the end of the year for income tax purposes whether someone is paying the match tax that they're supposed to pay. Again, that's a good effort. Of course, we have reservations around data privacy. We have reservations around trade secrets, which we have problems with. But again, it is a laudable effort in terms of using technology to then enhance the tax base. So again, that's something good and something that can continue to happen to make sure that we collect more taxes.
Yeah, and yes, please finish.
And I think finally is the question of incentives, tax incentives vis-a-vis tax expenditure. Of course, our view has been there's need for more study to ensure that, when you are changing things from, for example, zero rated to VAT exempt or standard rated, what is the reasoning behind it? And is that meant to actually increase revenue collection? When you look at income tax provisions where, for example, an incentive was being provided for you to do 100 units of housing, and in exchange you get a reduced rate of 15% corporate income tax. But that is being proposed to be removed with the Finance Bill 2025. Again, how are we encouraging vis-a-vis also balancing tax expenditure? And of course, that's space to watch, because depending on the studies that have been done by National Treasury and Kenya Revenue Authority, they should be able to tell us that they will actually collect more through the changes that they are doing.
Yeah, I want us to move to the pertinent point that you have pointed out, but staying on the VAT aspect, that is the zero rating question. But Dr. Grace, on the incomes that you talked about, how then can we address the continued informalization of the economy? As per the 2024 Economic Survey report, what's only accounted for in the formal sector is 78,000 of the 782,000 created within the informal sector. So what is the consolidation point here to net more people into the tax bracket?
Thank you, Ayub. But allow me, before even I answer that question, my Alex has brought on board. And I think talking about our continuous not meeting our revenue targets, especially from taxation, I think he has given a very good analysis. And I just want to add my voice into it and say that what happens actually is that every time we don't meet our revenue targets, because a big proportion, what I said, 73%, over 73% is actually about 73.5% of our expenditure going to recurrent, then we find that the section that falls short is actually the development part. Why? Because the recurrent, it is more of like a fast charge. So there's no way you will not continue paying salaries and wages and paying the debt repayment and all that. So I think that really goes further even to enhance that the 643 billion that is set aside for development, it is still raided further by us not meeting our revenue targets, because that is where it goes. Allow me also to just weigh in on also the issue of the zero rated and exempt, and just give a practical example that we have so many goods that are being proposed in the current finance bill that will be able to transition from zero rated to exempt. And maybe just to clarify that, is that when a good is zero rated, the input tax that is charged to the input when you're processing that good, then it is allowable for deduction. There's a deduction tax. Therefore, you can be able to claim from KRA or from the input tax component that you used to process that good. But when it goes to exempt, it means then you cannot be able to claim that particular item. And therefore, what we see is that ideally, ultimately, at the end of it all, you'll see those goods that have now been transitioned from zero rated to exempt. Actually, then they will go a little higher, because then the final consumer input component
will be pushed on the consumer.
Yeah, it will be pushing the consumer in as much as it would come in as a tax, but it is now a cost to the production. And some of goods that I have of concern is looking at items that relates to pharmaceutical products. So you'll see like medicine slightly going up. You'll see issues around processing of animal feeds, and then you'll see a bit of that going up. And maybe let me pick the third one that is of concern, is I think we are now currently just talking a lot about going green and clean energy. And I've noted that the solar panels, the lithium batteries have also been reclassified from zero rated to exempt, and therefore it means that those goods will marginally go up, because then the input component of the tax has to be passed to the final consumer. But coming back now to the US measures and what needs to be done around how we look at it, is that we are likely still not to meet our revenue targets. But I'm happy at the revenue reforms that have been introduced in the current finance bill that seeks to, for example, leverage a lot on technology, on how we can be able to our revenue. And one of the things we have been talking about, I think at ISPAC we have been very vocal in terms of increasing the tax base. The 8 million employed people who really are constantly paying their taxes, I think they have really reached a fatigue level where every increase in taxation is coming to them. And we are happy with the proposals of this current finance bill that looks at not increasing any tax directly, but to let the informal sector, and how do we formalize them? There was a proposal that we gave that why can't we give a unique number of every adult when they get to a certain level, like what we have the pins, and make sure that we can have a way of tracking them in terms of what revenues are they raising. How can we consolidate even the small groups? Because one of the sector that has been very difficult to bring to the tax base is actually the micro, small and medium enterprises, because nobody is tracking what they are doing. Sometimes they are tracking in cash. So how do we formalize them? And one of the ways we have proposed even in the past on how to formalize them is to form them into societies or into circles. I know we tried that, for example, in the matatu industry. We tried to do circles, but there's no proper follow-up on them. So that then we can say, how do we then follow up on their operations so that then we can bring them into the tax net, especially for those who really transact a lot in the cash. And I know that is part of what KRE wanted to bring on board, being able to bring in having optics of their transactions when they enter or in the bank statement, but also that comes with the challenges of data protection.
And then year in, year out, that has been the question of also the tax disputes and what's presented in the finance bill, which doesn't give chance to, for, if there's an appeal, then the possibilities of now the person winning in the second tier, if, for example, say the matter moves to the courts. But we'll talk about that, as well as also the question of debt restructuring and also the deficit. But Lydia, on incomes, how then important is this? Because the salaried Kenyans are feeling the squeeze on their pay slips, which has in turn affected the safety net programs of sending 2,000, 3,000 there here. And apparently it seems then this squeeze continues as the only targeted marginalized Kenyans who are employed and untaxed. What then needs to happen here in terms of job creation, expanding the tax base to address some of the issues pointed out by Dr. Grace and Alex, to net more people and have our revenues go up?
I think it's important to just take a step back. If we look at the Finance Bill 2023, effectively the Finance Act, which was heavily reliant on direct tax. So those are a lot of proposals that, of course, led to what Alex has spoke to before, where we saw an introduction of widening the tax bracket to hours of 35%. So in 2023, there's a very heavy reliance on direct taxation, so introducing tax on direct income, on income tax. Fast forward to Finance Bill 2024, the focus here was to introduce taxes on, rather, indirect taxes. So we saw proposals to introduce motor vehicle tax, which was 2.5% of the value of the vehicle. Of course, there was a controversy around this. So a lot of the proposals then were not really implemented because of what transpired with the finance bill last year. So currently, the finance bill now might not appear as though there's introduction of actual tax or new taxes. But if you then look at it, there's some level of, cutting down on the tax expenditure. So I think Dr. Grace and Alex have spoke to this earlier. The proposal to perhaps then reduce or rather change the tax exempt status, zero rated status of some products to exempt effectively means that the government is trying to cut back on the tax expenditure. If I look at the numbers in 2021, the tax expenditure stood at 292 billion, went steadily up to 393.6 billion as tax expenditure. As of 2023, I think the amount was about 590 billion in tax expenditure.
Yeah.
So now with the shift in zero-rated products to exempt and perhaps introducing some products from exempt to standard rate, we are seeing a trend where it may not look as though there's increased tax burden, but effectively, given the approach that then is being proposed by the finance bill, perhaps we would see an increase to the end user at the end of the day. Now, if we go back then to measures to increase the tax burden, because we've already established a majority of the taxpayers are in the formal sector, which forms a very small percentage of the taxpayers in the country. There is the ETIMS arrangement that perhaps, or discussion that has been had and now implemented. I think, in my view, is a good way to perhaps bring a lot more persons into the tax bracket. And I think Alex talked about this. Yeah. Applying technology to enhance, or net in more taxpayers. I know there's discussions to have reverse invoicing mechanisms so that any business that is transacting with individuals that perhaps do not have the capacity to register and apply or rather comply with the ETIMS regulations,
yes.
Then we would have a reverse invoicing mechanism that then allows for the KRA to have visibility to taxpayers that then are not within the tax bracket. So this can be one way to perhaps expand the tax bracket. I know, I think Finance Act 2023 or 2021 had introduced a presumptive tax where there was the proposal was then to have a presumptive tax paid at the point of obtaining your county license fees. So at that point, because all small and medium enterprises, your kiosks at home or within the estates usually would have a county license to rate. So then that was a proposal then to introduce a presumptive tax. At the point of renewing your license, you would then have a way to then bring in the informal sector into the perhaps tax bracket to sort of expand the tax base and in bringing in more people into the tax bracket. Yeah. So those are just my initial thoughts around that. Okay,
Dr. Grace, Lydia, and Alex, when we get back from the break, we continue with the conversation and we sample some of the feedback that you have sent us here on these live broadcasts regarding budget 2025 and 26. Here is what you are saying. And this from Engineer Lazaro. My concern, he says, is the technical language being used in budget committees. It's not easily digestible to ordinary wananchi. Most people at the grassroots don't understand the difference between tax exemption and zero rating. We'll come back and explain more. Kiteki Michael says past experience with the fiscal austerity strongly suggests that for the economy's long-term health, it's better to restrain government spending than to raise taxes. Budgeting for what you cannot raise is wrong. It's like trying to milk a cow dry. Frank Orinde says the 2025-6 budget may have avoided introducing new taxes, but it also avoided offering real solutions. There's no clear pathway for youth employment, no bold stance on corruption, and no relief for the struggling Mamamboga or Juakali sector. The silence on public debt and executive wastage is deafening. Bob Otieno Wino says, I foresee a part 2 of total rejection of the over-ambitious 2025-6 finance bill driven by the high cost of living. We are already struggling economically and the high taxes currently being collected are not accounted for. MC_Rumors says the 2025-6 budget is overambitious. Why do we continue to borrow heavily only to spend extravagantly? The government of Kenya must stop wastage and seal the loopholes used to siphon public funds. We are not just facing corruption, we are dealing with budgeted corruption, and the truth is we are living beyond our means. Okello Mwalimu says major impediments in our quest for a pro-people budget are wastage and misplaced priorities. Every time the Treasury makes a budget, it strives to please the powers that be first. A country that struggles with food insecurity and unemployment must get her priorities right. We also have the live pictures from the National Treasury where the CA Mbadi is preparing for his budget statement, which contains the spending plans for at least 4.2 trillion. Today, the budget statement in the National Assembly is expected to highlight the government's spending priorities for the financial year running from the 1st of July to June 30th, 2026, 1st of July 2025, that is, to June 30th, 2026, and the proposed measures to fund the budget. And after the break, we'll be talking about the funding aspect, the deficit, debt restructuring, and the cost of corruption on Kenya's budget. All that after the break here on this special day, on special coverage of the country's budget. Stay tuned.
You are watching Sound Candy Talk live. Sound Candy Talk is timely, accurate, professional, and affordable. You have a complaint or compliment, any question concerning our broadcasting, contact us soundcandytalk@gmail.com. We are on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and X at Sound Candy Talk. Call us on 0718 45 45 85. You are watching Sound Candy Talk live. Are you looking for video live streaming services? You want your church services to be on air? You do not know where to market your goods and services? At Sound Candy Talk, we deliver the best live stream services for your events, product and service launches, conferences, weddings, and live. Reach on us today.
And I really appreciate for being with you and having moment discussion, having a day with you. Indeed, it's so great as Bernard started over. For more confirmation or for more details of if you want to support the channel, just use the scrolling details on the screen and it will be great. If you also want to advert with us, use the screen details on the screen and we'll market your product very well, and we also market. And if the first time coming along the channel and you have not clicked the subscription note, please make sure you click the subscription note so that we can be together.
Sound Candy Talk live news.
the challenge that the government have been having, and that's why the measure that she has talked about, the equipment to construct, hospitals, specialized hospitals, have now been moved from zero-rated to exempt, and simply because to standard-rated, simply because when you look at what we call the tax expenditure, that is the revenue that the government loses as a result of zeroizing some items, as a result of exempting sometimes some items, or even giving some incentives. And that have been the biggest conversation. Our financials, when you look at the World Bank, IMF, have been asking us, why are we losing 417, for example, billion in VAT because of the exemption and zero rating? And that's why in this finance bill, if you look at it, the government is saying we are not increasing any tax. We are not introducing new taxes. But in essence, why is the government, how is
Welcome back. You're watching this special coverage here on Citizen Television. Budget 2025-26. The Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi, who we have been keeping track of his movements, is now at the National Treasury. Today he is expected to table up a statement containing the spending plans of at least 4.2 trillion Kenya shillings today. The statement that will be delivered the National Assembly is expected to highlight the government's spending priorities for the financial year starting 1st of July 2025 and ending on the 30th of June 2026, and the proposed measures to fund the budget. And with me in studio, the gentleman and the two ladies, Dr. Grace Kamau, Alex Kanyi and Lydia, are with us in studio this morning to take stock of what then this means. Coming to you, Alex, the funding and the question of then how to fund. First, let's begin with the deficit, and of the more than 800 billion Kenya shillings, more than 500 will come from the domestic market. We've just talked about the creation of employment and the private sector performance. Ideally then, if that comes from the domestic market, crowds out the private sector, is it? And what are the consequences?
Yeah, I think just to take us a little bit back, when government was borrowing from the domestic market at very high rates, be it in your infrastructure bond, be it in your treasury bills. So we saw the effect in terms of then the government crowding out everybody else, and it was actually more profitable to lend to the government than to lend to anyone. And I'm sure, financial institutions followed suit. They would have preferred to lend to the government as opposed to you and I, perhaps, who would have been evaluated as risky. And some people could not pay back the money from those financial institutions. While the rates have come down to what we now see from the 18% to now almost below 10% for treasury bills and etc. So that is a positive move, but again, from the deficit, like you say, government will definitely have to borrow again from the domestic market and internationally to just make sure that they meet the budget deficit. But again, this deficit problem is not new, just like the revenue problem that you are speaking about. And I just want to go through a few numbers courtesy of Budgety Hub. So financial year in 2018, we had a deficit of 60 billion, 608 billion. 1920, we had a 721 billion deficit. 2020-2021, we had a deficit of 791 billion. 2021-2022, we had a deficit of 950 billion. 2022-23 deficit of 748 billion. 2023-2024 835 billion. 2024-2025 this is 887 billion. 2025-2026, which is the year we are getting into, 876 or thereabout billion. So clearly you can see
17-18 is 608 billion.
17-18, yes, 608 billion.
18-19,
721. Moving to 791 in 2021,
So-
2020, 2021.
Okay.
21-22 was the highest at 950 billion, and it's, I guess, the COVID period.
Yeah.
Then you move to 748 billion.
In 22-3.
22-3, 23-4, 835.
4-5.
Then 4-5, 887. Then 5-6, 876 billion. So this deficit problem clearly has been there with us for quite a long time. This is more than 5 years back,
Yes.
almost going to 9 years. Yeah, 2025 going back to 2017. So you clearly see then a trend to actually plan to borrow without telling us we're actually going to borrow.
Yeah.
So when you think about our debt of 10.58 trillion as at 2024,
Yes.
which I'm sure has grown to
11
about
trillion.
11 trillion, from 10.58 trillion in 2024 to around 11 trillion now, you just wonder. Because there must be a problem. There must be a problem in terms of how we are doing our budgeting. The minister, cabinet secretary this time actually insisted that we are going to do a zero-based budgeting. I was hoping that for once that zero-based budgeting would then provide a solution towards deficits. To then say, this is what we've been carrying, 25-26, because of zero-based budgeting, we are actually trying to resolve the issue of carrying a deficit. But again, it's not working. So it's clearly evident that we are living beyond our means as a country. And it's a task that perhaps we hope the CS will be addressing today when he does his actual speech. But when we now move on to the actual line items in the budget, I can appreciate the kind of problem that he has. Because if you were to be asked, then what do you chop off? Again, you have a big problem deciding that this program is the one that we don't think is important. So we need to do something around how we are budgeting. Otherwise, we need to stop digging. We need to stop digging.
And then, Alex, the question is then, how did we get here? Because this is over how many financial years? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the 8th financial year. And it spans across also the previous administration. If we are to trace the original scene of the budget deficits, how then, the question is, did we get here? How are we finding ourselves in this position?
No, it's been growing steadily in terms of our borrowing. And again, thanks to Central Bank of Kenya and their numbers, in terms of the public debt and how it's been growing over the years. It's been growing. We were at about 2.42 trillion in 2014. We are talking about 10.58 as at 2024. In 10 years, we've increased our public debt by about 8 trillion. While the story has been that I inherited debt, and perhaps you want that to be the excuse, in the current government, in terms of just your borrowing, again, it shows we really have a problem.
Yeah.
Either what you are reporting as having been collected is wrong, not accurate, not true, or on the budget side, then we have a lot of wastage or money that is not being put to good use. Because if, for example, I started a project, say in the previous regime, and in the next regime, I'm still allocating huge sums of money to the same project, and it's not getting completed, and someone then inherits the same and perhaps budgets for the same again and again and again, there's a problem around wastage and how we are using our public resources. Yeah. At some point, we must decide that we really need to take very, very good action around wastage of resources and corruption. And I hope that in today's speech, we want to see clear actions around how do we deal with entities or agencies that are just wasting public funds. How do we deal with corruption cases and put more enforcement action around asset recovery. And to be even more radical, is it time that we even introduced life imprisonment for corruption? Go the China route.
Yeah. We seem to be copying
China route is even tougher.
Of Lee Kuan Yew, as well as how Singapore was lifted from the depths of despair to the great heights of hope by Lee Kuan Yew. But hardly do you see members of the political establishment also fancy his methods of improving the economy, which was investment in education, appreciating competency, killing corruption, and also putting the money where the priority areas are. Dr. Grace, Alex brings up this pertinent point, but ideally then, looking at the deficit as tabulated, it's 4.5% of our gross domestic product, the GDP. And this with the government set to borrow externally 284.2 billion, while the domestic borrowing will be set at 591.9 billion Kenya shillings. The consequences are immense, is it?
Yes, definitely the consequences are immense. But before even I talk about that, I want to talk about the whole, how we find ourselves where we are. And sometimes, whereas we expect very, very much from the CES, from our leaders, sometimes also it's to also put ourselves in their shoes and see where they're also coming from. That there is a proportion of the 4.2 trillion. Actually, I think over 1 trillion is actually going towards debt repayment. And that is a matter that we cannot put a blind eye on, that in as much as this budget comfortably have been 3.1 or 3 billion flat, or even 2.9 trillion, but we have over 1 trillion that goes towards debt repayment, which we cannot default. And much of that debt is actually external debt, which is even denominated in foreign currency and many other disadvantages that comes with it. So in as much as we find ourselves in the hole, and I agree with Alex that we really must stop digging the hole, is also to look at how that we have a big portion of the budget actually going towards the repayment of the debt that is already inherited, but we must be able to do something about it. And one of the things I'm happy about the current budget, it's not great effort, but at least it is effort towards the right direction, is that there is at least some reduction in terms of the amount of deficit that we see in the 2025-2026 financial year from where we had. It may be 11 billion, it may be less, but at least if we could start that trend, as opposed to now it would have probably have gone to 900 billion in terms of deficit. So I think that I applaud the CS to say that we have at least started moving towards the right direction in terms of reduction of the debt. But going
tunazunguka kote kote mchana kutwa kukuletea taarifa na matokeo ya habari kutoka pembe zote za ulimwengu. Jioni tunaweka mduara wa kujadili taarifa ziso hizo kwa mapana na marefu. Ungana nasi kila siku ya wiki kwenye
Okay, for me, you know, I'm a Muslim.
Yes.
Yeah. So like, my question is like, government inafanya nini ndo to include like kwa hii new funding model like to benefit peers? You as for me, like as Muslims, we are not supposed to take loans then ziko na interest on top.
Yeah.
So like na hii kitu imekuwa ikitusumbua for long. Utapata like mzazi wangu like ako zile like okay ukiapply kitu utapewa yes, but inakuja na interest. Na hiyo interest ina affect faith yangu, unaona, ina affect dini yangu, unaona. So like utapata like mzazi ata prefer like pesa itoke kwa mfuko yake direct akuje alipie fee as train. Like utapata hadi mzazi labda akona watoto wengi bado like hajakuwa like employed na like okay labda hayuko under white collar jobs, anafanya casual work lakini bado ana strain.
Yeah.
Alipia hiyo nini fee.
Unaona?
Yeah. Ndo asipati hiyo shame ya nini.
But you're supposed to take this loan
Yeah.
for you to be able to get it. So is there a Sharia compliant version of this funding model?
Sijasikia bado.
Sijasikia.
How has it been? Because
Previously
student loan has been there for very many years, as far back as 70s. How was it?
Tulikuwa tuna survive na bursary before.
But the bursary was a loan from, there was also a loan from HELP.
Sasa hiyo loan, most of the students seme kama place nimetoka Garissa, like wana prefer like wasi apply your loan.
Wasi apply for help.
Yeah, wasi apply for help. Like kwanza utapata mostly wenye wako affected ni boy child. Utapata mvulana amefika hadi form 4, juzi ilikuwa free, ndio primary like high school hadi primary high school zilikuwa free, ndio utapata watasomea hiyo nini, wakifika form 4 wakimaliza utapata boy amepita kuna B+ A minor, but hata join nini campus, ataachia mtu kama sister yake mdogo aende.
Bit of demonstrations because of the finance bill, and we had about 2 or 3 months that economic activity went down. But from then on, we have picked up, and I think you know the GDP growth rate is around 4.7%. Yeah. And we also see that the macroeconomic front has markedly improved. We see inflation now is around 3.8%. Interest rates have come down. We see foreign exchange reserves have gone up in central bank, and generally it's marked improvement. But the challenge is that spending pressures are still very high, and yet revenue-raising measures are not really much, because we decided this time around that we need to be sensitive to what Kenyans said last year, and so the finance bill that we came up this time was not more about raising revenues, but more about just making sure that we address equity and issues around clarity of clauses in the bill. We have focused more on better, bottom-up economic transformation agenda, and the specific agenda, budgetary allocations we have given, like fertilizer subsidy program. And in the education sector, for instance, we have tried to prioritize key areas such as free day secondary school, free junior JSS, and also free primary. Then on the health sector, we have security sector also, which is taking a huge chunk of the amount of money. We have tried to address on manufacturing. We have also areas around transport and roads, and more importantly also around agriculture and food security. So you will see this is a budget of about 4.2 trillion. And out of that, a huge chunk of it is actually going to serve the state.
Dr. Chris Kiptoo there in the company of my colleague on his reflections ahead of budget presentation at the National Assembly by the Treasury Cabinet Secretary CPA John Mbadi. The Principal Secretary himself will be in the company of the team and the delegation that will be making the short trip from the National Treasury to the National Assembly for the delivery of that statement. Lydia, Dr. Grace pointed out the crowding out consequence. And there's one big problem that is overlooked somewhat also in this budget, which is the pending bills headache and the inability, the lacking circulation of currency in the market and the financial system. Is this not a priority area as such that many businesses are suffering and hasn't come to the attention of the mandarins at the National Treasury?
Yeah. I think before we move on to the pending bills discussion,
yes.
Just to close out on what my colleagues here have talked about on the deficit, the key question is whether we are borrowing sustainably and how we are spending the money that we are borrowing. So if I just go back to the comments that we received from the audience, there's a lot of reference to misplaced priorities, budgeted corruption, silence on executive wastage. So the feeling already within the country that even as we plan and work out the budget, are we really spending sustainably? Are we using the money that we intend to allocate to the various sectors, and are we using that? Have we prioritized our budget? So I think overall then it becomes a trust issue within the
And then like mzazi alikuja kalipia 130 ya second sem, alafu napata nimebaki na 30k kwa nini kwa portal. Kurudi pale kwa nini place ya finance registration administration venye ifika kwa aliniambia wale deduct your 100.
How is the environment there?
Of the National Treasury, where we expect this is the nerve center of all the activities that are going to roll out today, where we expect a journey of the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Treasury, John Mbadi, will begin here heading to Parliament, where he is expected to read his maiden speech. What we're witnessing is just final touches in readiness for that march from the Treasury, and we expect him, of course, to stand here with the signature briefcase pose before heading out, of course, to Parliament, which is just about 500 meters away. And you can see here security has been bolstered. We've seen officials of the Treasury filtering in and out to make sure that all is set. And of course, you have our team already inside, keeping tabs on what is happening inside. And we are outside here, just trying to see the mood as well of the people who are also anticipating just to hear how the 2025-2026 budget will affect them. Of course, it has been a long journey here, Ayubos. The people involved, the technocrats in government, and particularly in Treasury, are trying to put this together. You know, a budget that many Kenyans are pregnant with expectation, while many as well feel that they have been let down in terms of the different dockets, state departments that have been affected by cuts. Talk about education, university education, high school, as well as primary education, and there has been that issue of capitation and how it will affect students and pupils in different institutions, and of course it is of great concern to parents. But of course we shall be tracking how the Treasury and the Cabinet Secretary will be speaking going forward. Of course, we also had dissenting voices about not only what is happening here today, but in regards to the murder of Albert Ojwang, and we had activists yesterday coming out saying that they shall be demonstrating here even as we expect the budget reading. So we are keeping an eye on that. We are, of course, your ears and eyes on the ground just to see how that will pan out. But remember, the Kenyans are still, talking about this 4.239 trillion budget, which is with the recurrent expenditure about over 70% or thereabout, and the deficit of development expenditure is what many Kenyans are saying, that we still lag behind in terms of development, and as much as we are raising this money from debt, on source revenue and things like that, we are still lagging behind when it comes to, of course, spending money in development projects. So we are keeping our eyes here that door, and of course that is where we expect the CS Treasury John Mbadi to come out from before heading to Parliament. So is the situation here right outside Treasury. As at now, we shall be keeping tabs and bringing our viewers up to speed. For now, back to you in studio, Ayub.
Maita, good morning and thanks for the update. Yes, Lydia, you had a point on the pending bills.
Yeah. So overall, these pending bills represent real people who we were discussing with my colleagues during the break, who've taken out loans to supply to the governments and the various government offices. So what this means is that as a startup, if you have perhaps taken out a loan to provide services and the government is taking, or these unpaid bills spanning years or months to pay, it stifles the growth of your business. You need money to be able to even overall spurring economic growth. So overall, then this needs to be checked. There's quite, I think, about 500 billion in outstanding pending bills. So then there's a need to fast track this to enhance economic growth for these businesses that are starting. The finance bill has proposed reduction in tax rates for startups, but if this continues as a trend, then overall, then what benefit would that have if there's no money these businesses are receiving, and at the end of the day, you're expected to still pay tax on these said unpaid bills that take quite some time to receive payments. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Alex.
There's on the pending bills issue. Of course, the audit revealed, the one that is ongoing, that out of the 700 billion, it's 200 billion that perhaps is due for payment. Yeah. So that introduces a few issues. Number one is whether the amounts in those pending bills are fair or they're accurate. Of course, if you just do a percentage of 2/7, just shows that perhaps whatever is being claimed as a pending bill is perhaps not a pending bill, or there's lack of proper documentation. For example, to show that there was an order from a government agency, then I supplied the goods. If it were goods, the goods were delivered, they were received. If someone does an audit to just check whether one of those goods is there, they're able to see, or to check if they're actually being utilized, they're able to see that. So I guess those are the kind of gaps that we see on that particular section, but we actually laud the work that is being done to just verify the pending bills, and we saw the president set up a committee to just do that. The other challenge around pending bills is the fact that government is already complaining that the price of the goods that they get is actually coming at a very inflated price. And the reason why I think that is so is because government is also taking too long to pay. So if I'm supplying to the government, then I have to think of, within what time will I be paid, and therefore I kind of put a markup, especially if I'm borrowing to pay, borrowing to actually supply the goods or services to the government. So that's another issue that is coming up. And finally, the other issue that is also coming up is people who are genuinely providing the goods and services to the government, and then the government is actually not paying. Because if then I borrow money to supply goods to the government, and then the government doesn't pay me, it means then the bank that perhaps advanced the credit to me will be on my neck. And if they're on my neck, then perhaps I also close down my business. So these are kind of the challenges that we see with pending bills that we hope CS Mbadi will have a chance to resolve. But also, to be fair to him, I think this is his first budget. Yeah. And going by the goodwill that he is showing, we hope that we'll soon see the results. I hope it just doesn't get swallowed by the system.
And it's coming to you. I'm looking at the agriculture sector, rural and urban development, 78 billion Kenya shillings, 3% of the total budget. Ideally, this is not commensurate with the value, because the budget policy statement was very high on value addition, yet you have a sector like agriculture getting a paltry 78 billion.
Thank you, Ayub, and allow me to also add my voice on the pending bills menace, and I think this is really big. And apart from it being stifling some businesses, actually I know many small and medium enterprises that have had to shut down because really you can't continue operating. And looking at the proportion, I think in the government they have been trying to allocate at least 15% of their procurement coming from either the vulnerable, the small, the medium, the people with disability, women, and the marginalized sectors of the economy. And looking at that population then not being paid, I think it's really something that have been addressed. And what we would have expected it to be, and I think we've seen this in the previous finance bills, where it becomes a fast charge, that the first thing you do is to pay whatever is pending, whether it is in the county government, in the government, or in the ministries, so that then it is paid. But allow me to also just note one of the things that has been brought on board this finance bill is the fast tracking of the implementation of accrual accounting. And I know this is one of the areas that the public will say that we have got very technical. But when we bring in the accrual accounting, is that where you bring everybody, every transaction into the fore, so that whether there is a change, for instance, in a county government, then whatever liabilities and assets left by the previous administration, even from a national point of view, they are all brought to the book, and therefore prudence dictates that they become a fast charge before you can be able to pay anything. Because we've seen a lot of projects, wherever there are changes in administration, especially at the county level. So there is a project that was almost being completed. Maybe it was completed, it was a hospital, and what was remaining is only putting in the instruments and the infrastructure. And when the new governor comes in or a new administration comes in, then they go out with their manifesto and they start up all over a new project, whereas it would have taken a very small amount to complete and pay whatever pending bills there is. So I'm very happy that the fast tracking of the accrual accounting is part of what the priority areas of this budget, which will therefore see a lot of whatever assets and liabilities being brought to the fore. Now, going to misplacement of priorities, let me call it that way because one of the viewers has actually said there are a lot of misplaced priorities. I think when you look at how much has been allocated to agriculture, and looking at what we are looking to achieve, and I know the better agenda has been very key in terms of food security.
Is going up by 14%. But that does not mean it's enough. That is where the challenge is, and I think even the Cabinet Secretary yesterday clarified that though 28% of the budget is going to education, it is still not enough. I think the entire sector has a funding gap of about 108 billion.
Do we get the value for all these billions? That 700 billion shillings goes into education. Do we get value for that anyway?
Well, if you look at the 700 billion, a bulk of that money actually goes to payment of salaries. Looking at just teachers, primary and high school teachers only, I think they are around 400,000, and they eat up about half of that amount. Then the other amount will go into capitation, and then you have a bit of it going to infrastructure. So it is not enough. And if you look at even the BPS, the requirement for the education sector would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 billion. So having allocated 700 billion is a good effort because it's 28% of the budget, but we still have a huge gap. That is why the students are complaining about the funding model. And I think the bigger challenge is the fact that the burden that the household is going to have, which is high, and then the part that is loan, that is what the student has just explained, is also very high. Because when you're getting into the job market and you already have a loan component of $1 million plus, then you are starting in a very serious negative.
We're wrapping up the conversation now, guys. Sorry, we are absolutely out of time. But as we think of the fixes for this year, this budget, healthcare, education, what would you say? Just one person, 30 seconds, one fix. 30 seconds, one, these are the first two hands to go up and they haven't spoken, so I'll have them. 30 seconds, 30 seconds. Fixes for health, for education, 30 seconds.
My name is Alvin Kisara, and this is my fix. Most of the time unasikianga member of parliament wanajiongezea mshahara na wakisema wajiongeze mshahara, mimi sisikizangi wakisema ati mshahara pesa hayuko kujiongezea mshahara. But in this case, ndugu yangu hapa nimefurahi vile amesema like out of 700 billion plus, more than half of it inaenda kulipa walimu, maintenance nini. So in real sense like the funding doesn't even add, it doesn't even be the logic. So my fix will be to reduce pesa zao civil servants. At some point I was checking the salaries around that were being paid for civil servants for a whole year. It could get up for Kenya to build SGR bila deni yoyote. So these civil servants, they are being paid a lot of money, which is very, very unnecessary. Mbona unakuja mahali na kukana kudictate mshahara wako na supposed kuongezwa na wewe ni a public servant. There may be reasons as to why we are supposed to, maybe wana supposed kuongezwa mshahara, but so far hatujapata reason ya wao.
30 seconds measure. So cut public wage bill.
Okay. My name is Webster. I'm from Tribeless Youth, and I feel the way we can fix this nation is by stopping the politics. Let us stop politicizing everything. When we were devolving this nation, there were factors that was not supposed to be devolved because they ended up to more devolved corruption, like health and education. These are not things that are supposed to be politicized. Hatufai kuwa tuna negotiate about health. We need policies and structures that, regardless of the regime that is in power, regardless of who you voted, regardless of where you are in this nation, you deserve quality health care because you pay for it. The money is there. And you deserve quality education because we pay for it. Thank you.
Last, Ronald, as we wrap up, just your parting shot.
Great. So the conversation has been real, and I think we have heard even from our guests here today. One of my fixes, and I'm a big supporter of devolution, because devolution has come to change. As much as we say that it devolved corruption, but we have seen greater improvements. So for me, one of the things that I'll be looking forward and I still champion is that we increase the allocations to counties, because the allocations then mean we are going to have better service deliveries, which could be health. So right now, the allocations to the counties is stuck at 4 or 5. The Senate is proposing 465. Then if we increase to that end, that means also we'll be able to trickle down more resources. That means we'll be able to get more medicine to the facilities, meaning that we'll be able to get more infrastructure at the county level. So that's my first fix. The second fix is that let the government use data. Because now if we use data, if we could hear what the students are saying about the loan, that's a research, that's a data. If we could determine, for example, we look at the issues of water within our hub, and we rely so much on data because we see the areas like Samburu has 26% of water, households accessing water. Then what does that mean for that particular county? That means we have to invest more. So going forward is, as a country, we need to have our priorities right, and the priorities needs to be backed up with data.
Asante sana. Peter Rono, Budget Facilitator, Rift Valley Hub. Alex Reithi, Head of Programs at the Institute for Social Accountability, our partners at Okao Chumi, and our residents, students, leaders, teachers, Wazewa Kijiji, everybody from Nakuru County who's been able to join us today. Asanteni sana. We will be monitoring, of course, what John Mbadi will be saying in the National Assembly today. Tomorrow, we'll still be here. Mike Kwa Ground will still be in Nakuru County. We'll be discussing other issues that affect the citizens of Nakuru and what also works and doesn't work in Nakuru County. But thank you for tuning in. Fixing the Nation, one conversation at a time. It's been Eric Latif, Mariam Bishar from Nakuru County.
Sound Candy Talk Live News.
Well, thank you very much. I, as the Secretary, the CS for Finance and Treasury, that is John Mbadi, comes in to read the first budget under the broad-based government. They're calling it the broad-based budget, but we wait to see what is in it. Already, we have seen activities here in Parliament. We are the National Assembly main entrance, where most of those activities are going to happen. And of course, it is a beehive of activities as the members of Parliament and of course the House prepare to receive that budget. I remember Parliament also has some other roles. I remember they're supposed to do representation, oversight, and of course representation, oversight, and also the other functions that they also perform depending on what their mandate is. And of course, we are here to see what they are going to do. Right now, most of them are holed up in committee rooms. Remember, there's that issue of Albert Omondi Ojwang, which has clouded this budget day with members of Parliament asking questions. And yesterday it was the day for the Senate, and today the National Assembly is having a chance to also ask the questions and get the answers from the Inspector General of Police, Douglas Kanja, and the Security Committee, which you have actually talked about, is actually dealing with that matter as we speak, with the IG appearing. The most important thing is to check how much they're going to be allocated to ensure that we are safe, and to see how much is going to be spent prudently, not to advance police brutality as we have seen in the past few days since that issue broke out, and how the country has been on high alert about police brutality. And of course, other issues that we expect to also take shape and about the ballooning public debt, which has crossed the 11 trillion shilling mark. And of course, in this current financial year that we are coming into, we are going to borrow another 700 or 800 billion shillings, and we are going to repay 1.1 trillion shillings or thereabout, which means that we are borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and also just going around in circles. But this is something that is going to take time to really deal with, because we are over and above the ceiling. And of course, we're going to go back to you, Ayub, because we'll be monitoring and giving you the details as they transpire here in Parliament. Ayub. Emmanuel, thank you, and good morning to you, giving us the outlook of the business before Parliament today. And that includes the presentation that will be done by John Mbadi, the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary, who will be delivering the budget statement that contains the spending plans for the 4.2 trillion Kenya shillings for the financial year, starting the 1st of July this year, and which will end on the 30th of June next year in 2026. Your final comments here, starting with you, Lydia.
Yeah. Right. So just to I think it's important to mention that a good tax, changes in tax laws make it very it's a very uncertain business environment for both taxpayers, businesses, individuals, to say the least. So in order for us to have growth, real growth, we need a sustainable and consistent tax system. I think we've talked about this earlier, that as opposed to very frequent tax shifts, we've seen countries like Ethiopia that work with tax laws for 5 years without having to change. So imagine businesses having to keep up each year. In between that, you have a finance bill, you have a finance act, you have a tax amendment act. So it's important to have a consistent or predictable tax system for planning purposes for businesses and individuals at hand.
Yes, Alex.
I think on the expenditure side for this budget, going by the budget summary, things around e-mobility, fertilizer subsidy, affordable housing, things to do with school feeding, intern doctors and getting them paid, industrial parks for industrialization, the cash to the elderly, 25 billion or thereabout. There's even plan to just deal with sanitary towels of about 940 million. We can actually see good plans by the government to put money to good use, while there are others which, of course, are questionable, and like putting in more money into Hustler Fund when already the reports is it's not doing so well and people are not paying. I guess those are some of the areas we need to look at. There's the duplication of just putting money into CDF. President has his own bursary. MCAs want also, I think, theirs to just fund education. That needs to be realigned. There was a government plan to bring entities together, consolidation, like, for example, the Youth Fund, Women Fund, etc., being brought into one fund to ensure that there's rationalization. I think those are good plans which should be implemented to ensure that then with this particular budget, we get to see good results.
Yes, Dr. Grace.
Thank you. I'm wondering what to say. I have still so much. But just let me just borrow the words from the PS, National Treasury. And I think what they have said, they listened to Kenyans last year. And they have used the recommendations that came in drafting this particular finance bill. And I think that is really good. And that goes to my opening remark that I'm so impressed by the level of engagement that Kenyans have had. And this is an encouragement to see that those recommendations that you put across, they may look like they have not been implemented all, but they really inform even moving forward. Okay. But also having said that, let me also just highlight two issues that we would also want to see them being brought to book. And one of them is enhancing the own source revenue collections, especially at county level. And one of the recommendations we have put across for that one is, can we be able to come up with a one system that is able to be implemented across all the counties that will be very efficient and cost effective, and that will help in terms of enhancing the own source revenue collections at the source. Okay. And finally, let me talk about the issue of governance and prudence in public financial management. And this is one of the proposals we had actually put across. That can we also have, especially at the counties, one of the, in the formula for the revenue allocation, can we have also prudence in the management of finances? Part of formula, so that those counties and those organizations that yes. Take up their finances, like absorption of their development fund, those who get clean audit reports and many other public financial management prudency implemented, then can we have them also getting a small share of the revenue as a result of that as an incentive? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Grace Kamau is the Chief Executive Officer, the Institute of Public Accountants, Certified Public Accountants, Kenya. Thank you for your time. Alex Kanyi is a tax expert, CDH Kenya, and Lydia Moss is Senior Manager at the KPMG. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. Much appreciated for your input here. And thanks to you too. Up next is Seminar Citizen that will be coming to you live.